Well, hello, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're calling in from. Very excited to have so many joining us today on this webinar. Welcome to the Insights Live discussion panel from Spacestor. Just while we're waiting for the attendees to join, look, I can see the numbers still climbing. We're going to launch a brief poll just to get your views on some of the questions that we see bouncing around the post-COVID workplace, which of course is the subject for today. So please feel free to share your thoughts. We'll just give it a couple of minutes while some of the attendees join, and then we can get this discussion kicked off. Okay, looks like we're ready to start. So welcome again. Thanks for joining Spacestor this afternoon to discuss this concept of the post-COVID workplace. We're hosting this panel discussion, and I'm delighted to welcome my fellow panelists today. We're going to introduce you to them in a second or two. And what we've been focusing on in these panel discussions, we had a great discussion last week with a number of panelists, is not just the conversations that people are having around the workplace in a back to work situation in the short term, but what are the longer term impacts going to be of the global pandemic that we're all currently experiencing. So we're very pleased so many of you have taken time to join us in this discussion today. We want to make this a very live, very open discussion, and we want to welcome your questions as well. So please take the opportunity to put any questions, any thoughts, any input you'd like to have to the panelists into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. So firstly, we have Andy Swann. Andy's the founder of My Amazing Team and the author of the book, The Human Workplace. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this.
That's great. Could you give us just a second or two of introduction to your background and insights and perspective that you bring to the conversation?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So my interest, and I don't like to use the word expertise, is in the relationship between people, organizations, and work. And obviously that overlaps into the physical workplace, but also the virtual workspace and all different methods and iterations of that relationship. So I come at it very much from a people first point of view. I run a company that's based in the US as well as the UK. So kind of at the moment, really practicing what I preach and understanding the shift in the way we work and the way we collaborate and the way we communicate that then impacts kind of the spaces we use and how we get things done effectively.
That's great. Thanks, Andy. Very pleased to have you with us today. And then I can also introduce Adrienne Rowe. So Adrienne is the head of workplace strategy and solutions with Merck. Welcome, Adrienne. Could you give us a brief introduction to yourself?
Thank you. At Merck, I'm responsible for our workplace strategy for the global portfolio. Prior to Merck, I worked with Fidelity Investments in corporate real estate, and prior to that, I was with Disney in Orlando for almost 20 years. So I come from a hospitality background and am very interested in creating environments where people can thrive.
That's great, and I think that's going to be an ever more important topic as we move ahead. And then we have Philippe Paré, also with Gensler, so Managing Director and Principal of Gensler in Paris. Welcome, Philippe. You could give us a brief intro to yourself.
Thank you, Alex. Delighted to be on the panel today. It's a thrill to be exchanging with the panelists, and I've been with Gensler for 15 years and had the opportunity to practice in the Los Angeles office, London office, and now opening up our Paris office. And architect by training, but fell in love with workplace design. I think it encapsulates all the complexity of trying to understand how people come together, what makes them collaborate, socialize, and ultimately interact in a way that will improve our clients' businesses. So thrilled to be exchanging with you all today.
It's great. It's going to be a good conversation. Appreciate you joining us. And then I'd also like to introduce Nick Baxter. So Nick is MD for Spacestor in the UK. Welcome, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Again, welcome to our panelists visiting. Thank you, Adrienne and Philippe and Andy. Really appreciate you bringing your expertise and experience to this. Yes, I'm MD in the UK business of Spacestor. That's formally, my real leaning, I guess, is the strategy and marketing. So the moves we need to be recognizing and making from year to year, probably more than week to week. So very glad to be hosting this along with Alex today. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Nick. And then finally, I'm Alex, VP of Sales, Alex Harvey. And likewise, I think the insights and the viewpoint that we have at Spacestor in working with so many of the great clients we work with on a global basis has allowed us to be involved with some amazing workplaces previously. Many of our clients in a whole host of different sectors of industry, but particularly the tech sector, with many of the leading tech companies being part of the projects that we co-create. But what we're fascinated to look at right now is, what does the workplace of the future need to look like? Because I don't think there's any denying that the global pandemic that we're experiencing currently is going to have a big impact on the workplaces, both in the short term, but also in the long term. So let's get into the discussion, and we're welcoming you to put in any questions. If you only just joined, this is the Spacestor Insights live panel discussion, and I'm joined by Philippe, Paré, Adrienne, Rowe, Andy, Swann, and then also Nick Baxter and myself. So just to kick things off, perhaps push this question in your direction to kick off, Philippe. We're hearing a huge amount of speculation happening around what does the future of work look like? How's the coronavirus going to impact not just on the workplace, but how we work? I see some really bold predictions being put out there by some different quarters. What's your view around how far we can actually predict into the future, and the kind of discussions we're having today? How accurate and how bold do you think we can be in what we're saying?
Well, I think we can be as bold as we wish to be. Whether those predictions will become true or not remains to be seen. But I think on the basis of trying to steer away from short-term reactions and hysteria, trying to see what this crisis is teaching us. And I think one of the overwhelming conclusion is that working from home works. It's really incredible how we've been able to adapt in such a quick time frame, and essentially keep business going for a lot of companies and a lot of our clients in a way that I think is beyond our craziest expectations. And I think what that also taught us, or is teaching us, because it's not over yet, is that our expectations in the long term, when we return to the workplace, right? Hygiene aside, and I think that's an entire topic, and in my mind, it's more of a short-term discussion. But I think if we're interested about making predictions about the future, you have to look at it from the perspective of the workplace being really important for you to do all those things that aren't done so easily from home. And I think it will reaffirm the importance of workplace when it comes to collaboration, building social capital, using the workplace as the physical manifestation of a company's brand. And a company's brand, really, when it's well crafted, it is a vehicle to express a vision and mission and engagement. And I think people will be craving to see what companies stand for and how precisely they react when there are crises like these ones. And the feeling that you go to a workplace and you feel that you're part of something greater than when you are on your own working from home. Is something that actually may be the difference between certain companies being more attractive to certain generations of workers and others. So I think the mix or the nature of the workplace will change, where maybe currently it's sort of 75% individual workstations to 25% collaboration, socialization. Since we are able to do so much more from home, maybe a bold prediction would be to say, maybe we flip the table and it's actually 75% collaboration, socialization, upskilling, learning, client-facing, brand expression, and 25% of what we associate with a more traditional workplace, which are the desks and the work tables and the benches. So that's maybe one prediction.
There's a lot of thoughts there that we could carry forward. I'd like to just there's a question coming from Chris Radcliffe, who's just asking whether when referring to workplace we're referring to the office environment, and I think that's certainly where my area of expertise has been, and I know Adrienne will bring you in a second or two, but I know you have a very broad coverage of workplace within your portfolio. But I think that the focus, particularly for the audience we're talking to, is around the office workplace. But just picking up on some of Philippe's points, working from home actually works, and then just the concept of how the brand and workplace work together. Adrienne, could I bring you in, and then Andy, you can follow up with your thoughts on that?
Sure. My opening comment is that these are my comments and not the comments of Merck. So let's start there. To answer the question that came up in the Q&A, workplace for us includes office and also includes laboratories as well as manufacturing facilities. And more broadly, when we have mixed use sites, that might include all three. We think about it holistically. And then to the point about how far can we predict into the future, I think the one thing we can say for certain is that we need to be prepared for unexpected events, and that flexibility and resilience are more important than ever. So we should be thinking in terms of scenarios versus specific outcomes. We should be thinking in terms of ranges versus, numbers to a precise digit. And the classic example is headcount. Anybody who tells you that what the headcount forecast is in a year down to the single digit, I think is probably going to be off by plus or minus 20%. So let's just deal in plus or minus 20% would be my best example.
Good, Andy. But what are your views, particularly thinking of your views around the brand angle that Philippe was bringing in?
Absolutely. I think just to step it back and probably overlap on both what Adrienne and Philippe have said. It's going to be really interesting when it comes to predictions. Everybody's out there at the moment, and it gets good clicks to make big, bold predictions about how everything's going to completely change. But what I would say is 6 months ago, was anybody in workplace strategy sitting there saying, what's going to happen within the next 6 months if a global pandemic means that we all have to completely shift the way we work, not in 6 months' time, 1 year's time, like today. So none of us were expecting this. And as you said, Philippe, we proved it's possible. Organizations literally adapted overnight to enable people to work from home where it was possible, and to acknowledge that fact that, there are factories that still have to operate, hospitals are workplaces. So some of these workplaces, which, I've always been an advocate of responsive organizations and the ability to give people freedom within parameters to flex, but there are some parameters, i.e. running a manufacturing machine or having to be in a location such as a hospital to work. However, as far as possible, organizations have adapted immediately, and we know they can. And so the question is, why don't we do this going forward? Now, it's clear it's possible. My biggest concern is that I work with quite large corporations, and a number of the corporations I work in particularly in the R&D and innovation space with them strategically. And a lot of them have immediately put the brakes on and said, we're not going to innovate. We're focusing back into the core of the business. So instead of taking this opportunity where we've proved that we can innovate, whether it's from a workplace or an organizational perspective, immediately, a lot of organizations are saying, we know we can do it. However, we're going to regress and kind of put our heads back in our shells. So my worry will be, is this an opportunity where we can say, yes, we can work from home. Yes, we can rethink flexibility and workplace. design and approaches, and kind of look at holistic workplace as well as being a physical environment and a virtual environment, and that complete crossover, let's call it experience or platform for people to get their work done. Is that opportunity going to be taken, or are large organizations just going to say, you know what, let's get back to work as soon as possible and get back to what was normal before this happened, and as quickly as possible pretend it didn't happen? So I mean, I'm open to everybody else's thoughts on that, but that's my biggest worry at the moment, that might happen.
Well, I think it would be hard to go back because the genie's out of the bottle, right? Anyone who would tell you that it's not possible to work from home or to work remotely, they've been proven wrong. And I think on that basis, workers in general have sort of gained new leverage in terms of their expectations as far as being empowered to work where and when best suits them. So I think it beholds on companies to keep that trust going, and in fact, realize that actually it can be a win-win, right? Because you think about the sort of efficiencies that could bring forth in terms of rationalization of real estate, for example, in terms of time saved or not spent on commuting, or even from a sustainability standpoint, right? The change that's happened in the past few weeks, shows us that actually we can have a positive impact for the greater good, right? Of course, now the economy needs to restart, but I think we were all surprised by how quickly nature can heal itself. These really striking images that at least caught my attention, of dolphins swimming in the lagoon and wild boars roaming in Italian cities, and the view of the Himalayas visible from Indian cities. I think there's what I found really inspiring is sort of an awareness that we're on this together. We can adapt and change and flex very quickly, and that lessons can be drawn for the better, as challenging as the events are right now.
So flexibility and adaptability have come up a few times, and I was interested in what both Andy and yourself were saying. Philippe, Nick, I'd be interested in your views on the positives that may come out of the situation that we're in. I think everyone acknowledges there's a terrible situation that's had a huge impact on many people, many lives, in a devastating way globally. But from a situation like that, where you might say everything's thrown up in the air, the norm has been challenged, and as you say, the genie is out of the bottle. So what do you say, Nick, around the positives that could come out of a situation like this? And perhaps Adrienne could bring in her thoughts as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting to consider the response curve, if you like, isn't it? Because right now we're in that, you might say, a violent reaction to a crisis, calamity, and that happens typically, and then there's the ability to manage that and live with that grows, and we get better at it. Someone made a very good point last Thursday on a very similar panel discussion, that tech will get better very quickly because there'll be massive feedback. We're all on Zoom or WebEx or Teams, and there'll be a wealth of feedback, and the tech, hardware and software, will get better much faster than it would have done. So there's a kind of a positive. I think the question that's come up about in the Q&A from Richard about the ongoing, it won't just be a short-term thing, that we're more aware and providing more for sanitization, for hand cleansing, for surface cleansing. I'm on a panel with the Cornet hackathon currently, and there's a very interesting question up for homework right now about mapping what a work day post-COVID might look like. And when you get into the detail, it's very interesting how many tens of times we have to touch different surfaces and door handles, and also the places we have to go. Great question came in last Thursday, and it was at the end of the webinar. We couldn't really cover it off, but that was from Simon Bracken of Scanomat, who do these wonderful touchless coffee machines. And he had a great concept of, could work become your second safe place away from home? And I thought that's a really interesting one. So we're at home, we're in lockdown. When we emerge, will we want to go to every supermarket, corner shop, coffee shop, whatever it is that we did before? Or can we manage that? Will there be a mid-term change there?
And a big question around real estate, because the whole flex office concept has been exploding over the last 5 years, isn't it? How will that be viewed? As you say, my home is my safe place, but where's your next safe place beyond that? Any thoughts around that, Adrienne, how that will affect the real estate strategy for clients?
Yeah, so I hadn't really considered the second safe place concept, so that is really interesting. I would say a few things. One, going back to the notion of flexibility, we're not just going to be dealing with the aftermath of a pandemic, but now we're dealing with all of the economic shocks, and companies are going to be scrubbing their plans to say, where can we shore up and reduce expenses that we don't need to be spending. You mentioned about I think Philippe mentioned about the genie being out of the bottle. I would phrase it differently. I would say, the closet door has been opened, because this work has been happening. If you've been paying attention to any of the utilization data from literally every source, it's, people have been voting with their feet for a long time. And it's just been sort of, I think we've had some leaders who have sort of, not been fully aware or fully acquainted with those facts. So it's not a new thing. What's happening now, though, is that it's everybody, and it's everybody knows it. So, I do think that in terms of going, quote unquote, back to normal, we'll never go back to pre-COVID. We have to just look forward. Life will be different. I think we have to think differently about the space, both in terms of how much we have and how we use it. I don't necessarily see, a complete return to office as usual. I think that we will, we're going to need to embrace distributed work even more than before. But, to that point, and I think Andy was talking about innovation and is this disrupting innovation? Well, we've had, if you're a multinational company, you're already innovating from a distance, whether it's from someone's home or it's from an office overseas. We've been doing this type of thing for a long time. Now we just have to, I think, really formalize it and put the processes in place so that we're not reliant on co-location for innovation, but that we are good at doing it across distances.
So just segueing off that, I think, Andy, you mentioned, some companies are kind of hunkering down, going into hibernation and hoping this is all going to go away. Some are investing and innovating. And just bringing in one of the questions we have from Katie Novak on the chat is asking about casual collaboration missing. That what we're doing now, and I've said this a few times, what we're doing now is very intentional. We've all agreed to meet at this time. We're having a conversation, which is great. That sparks off some great innovation. But what about those coffee point moments, those water cooler moments? How do you see that happening in a virtual environment?
I think that's really important to think of from a number of angles. You have the innovation angle in that if you go right back and think, well, what is innovation about? It's about creating the future through ideas and developing them and understanding what works and what doesn't and what demand there is. And great ideas come from perspectives kind of overlapping. And if you don't have those casual points of conversation where two people who, if within their teams, particularly in a larger organization that might be siloed, if you don't have those opportunities for them to just have a casual conversation where something might be sparked, actually that's quite a big risk to kind of shaping that future. But on that note, there is that personal benefit to being able to have those casual conversations, whether it's how was your weekend, what are you working on, kind of taking that wider interest in the work of your peers and the company as a whole, and having that connection to to the brand or the organization you work for, and kind of, feeling the benefit of that connection, whether it's in terms of work support, whether it's in terms of the structure it gives your life, whether it's in terms of personal interest, or just that ability to feel part of something. I think all of these things are going to be the big questions that come out of this. And if I had a slight concern, I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate on this. So going back to my slightly negative take, and I don't believe this is necessarily going to be the case, but the problem I have is what if some of these employers, at the end of this, if we go into a large economic contraction and we hit a recession, and this is something, I was working in the recruitment industry in 2008, and this is something we saw then, when all of a sudden, particularly in lower paid roles, employers are able to go, well, there's no jobs anywhere else. You're lucky to be working from me. I'm going to spend the minimum amount of money I have, and you be grateful for the job. And so all of a sudden, a decade's worth of progressive work around flexible workspaces, activity-based working could actually take a giant step back before it moves forward. So yeah, I think there's a huge number of questions to answer as we.
But I think just to add to that, I think the companies that do adopt this way of doing things will just not be able to become or stay top performing companies. I think to be a top performing company, you have to place importance on the workplace, and the physical workplace will always have a role to play in as being the anchor, if you will. Just to add to answer your question, also add to what Andy was saying, or starting to allude to, I think one of the positive of this crisis has been the way in which it has humanized your colleagues, right? You really are able to see your colleagues in a whole different light as they are working from home or opening their homes up, and sort of to some extent the veneer of the office veneer sort of comes off a little bit, and what's been incredible is that while we do miss the casual impromptu encounters, right? There's nothing like the walk by and the quick chat. It has, in some ways, for the better, leveled the playing field, and we've actually had people who perhaps in a group setting in person were maybe the quiet ones. Suddenly there was really good flowing exchanges and really situations where everybody got equal airtime and very well managed dialogue, and I think the sort of feeling also of empathy as people open their homes, and you get a bit of an insight on what it takes to raise young kids, and not knowing before that why someone really needed to work from home, or what the demands on them were beyond the workplace that were invisible to the rest of us, and I hope that does remain. And maybe the other pivot point beyond innovation that I think is an important question, open question, is the notion of culture and its importance for any organization. And I think in the case of Adrienne and Merck, Merck is a company that has, much like Gensler, a very well-established culture, and that's keeping us going. But it's very tricky, as you hire new people, if they don't have that anchor, or for startups to maintain or foster a great culture, if the tools aren't there for them to really understand it, experience it, and so I think as we maybe start to look at a future where more of the work happens remotely, at the same time we have to be mindful that culture is not lost or diluted, and I think there's a bit of an open question there and a challenge for all of us.
I think what's happened is that over time we've let physical presence and occupancy and casual collisions just sort of happen at random. And what this has forced us to do is make everybody behave in the same way. Moving forward, I think what's probably going to happen, because we don't have unlimited square footage and we have to maintain a certain distance between one another, is that we're going to have to choreograph physical presence and be more planful. So going back to the issue of casual collisions, they may not be accidental anymore. They may be more planful. And I do think people are going to want to have them. I mean, nothing breeds gratitude more than deprivation, right? And right now we're all just, really missing each other in that physical face-to-face interaction. And we won't be able to take it for granted in the future. And so what that presents, so there's a real estate challenge. How do you create spaces that do what people need? But then there's a management challenge of how do you choreograph presence in a way that will, enable people to have those interactions.
That's great, Adrienne, and that segues into quite a few questions we're starting to come in on the Q&A box. First of all, James Lunn was complimenting on your Merck backdrop, which so far everyone who's been on the Zoom call that I've been with.
Again, this is my work, not from anybody with any creative ability at Merck. Thank you, though.
We're seeing a big upsurge. In fact, Spacestor have a load of downloadable Zoom backgrounds you can get off our website. But we're starting to see a few questions coming in around I guess there's been a big trend towards increased densification in the workplace. How many more people can we fit into this space? And clearly the whole workplace distancing, social distancing concept is going to really militate in the opposite direction. So the question we're getting asked is that going to take a permanent effect, or are they going to assist with the transition back to offices? Kara's asking. And then I'm also looking at a question from, I'm just trying to see it here now. So Leslie is also saying, do you see companies investing more in real estate again to make bigger workstations?
No, I don't see that at all. In fact, and I don't see us, one of the questions that had come up earlier was, are we going to go back to one-to-one seating and traditional work environments? I don't see that at all, because traditional work environments were really designed to put people around stuff. You had to be in a certain spot because that's where your stuff was. And now we've basically broken up with paper and the stuff in our office, which, by the way, is one of my silver lining hopes for the future, is that we all make that permanent and get rid of all the clutter and all the paper so that we're truly mobile. So that would be my one. But I can't imagine an environment where a knowledge worker who's not a lab scientist or otherwise needs to be physically tethered to a particular location. I can't see an environment where people are going to want to come into an office to be alone, right? When we've been alone, and we know we can be alone at home and work. And granted, they're going to have those periods of time during the workday when you need to do focused work, et cetera. But the real attraction to coming to the office is going to be community. So I think we need to continue to build for that. So if anything, you talk about densification, a lot of times to people that means how many desks can you cram into a spot, but it's not really a reflection of the number of people in the spot because of the utilization patterns. So I think we're going to have to really retweak those formulas. Frankly, I see fewer individual desks in the workplace, but bigger ones and spread further apart, and more of an emphasis on those environments where people can come together. And then there's the whole topic of how do you maintain and clean those environments. So I think we're going to have increased responsibility for sanitation in the workplace and resetting and really treating those environments like hospitality environments, so that people feel safe and comfortable in them on a day-to-day basis.
Someone actually, I was having a conversation, someone came up with a great metaphor and saying, if you imagine the scenario we're in right now, we're all doing a lot of cooking, baking a lot. I know my daughters are baking nonstop, and we can all cook a great meal at home. And if you have to imagine what the workplace in the future might actually be the difference between cooking your meal at home and going to a restaurant and enjoying a great meal. And the reason why you go to a restaurant actually are maybe not too dissimilar from the reasons that you would go to this newly supercharged workplace, right? You're spread maybe a little further apart. You go there for the communal experience. You get great service. I think service will be an aspect that probably will stay with us beyond the short term, right? The sense that people will need to be enticed back to the workplace, that there'll be a number of technologies that make the experience seamless and touchless, that the cleaning protocols are made visible, so that you actually feel like it's clean and hygienic, and that you go there precisely to collide with the worker, and that is your colleagues, and that's orchestrated in a way that really makes the experience as intense as it can be, and you get your fix of culture and socialization and forging those bonds that then allow you to efficiently collaborate in a virtual manner, because without that it's very difficult.
Love the analogy. And I think
you can tell I'm craving to go back to a restaurant.
I want to go to a restaurant now.
Yeah.
Because we want to. It's not because we have to. Glad of your thoughts on that, Nick. Bring in some views on that.
I think it's a great parallel. It connects a bit with one of the questions on the Q&A there about culture, I think, and human connection. We've been talking a lot about human connection, as you do at Gensler, Philippe, during the last year, I suppose. And it's a major part of our New York design center that you helped us to design and set up, which we opened just in February, and then everything got locked down. But human connection and environments that support that, the accidental meeting, but we actually planned for it now in a good interior design. Planned serendipity, the coffee point, or I came across another one the other day, the village pump moment. That's really important, and we're proving the truth of that now, aren't we? That it is important because we lack it. We feel the lack of it.
It's fundamental, and I think if you go back to the definition of what work culture is, in my mind, work culture is an environment in which everyone makes the right decisions without being told what to do, right? And for that to happen, you need for people to know each other, to trust each other, to have empathy for one another, and to have respect. And I think the reason why I'm hopeful for the physical workplace is that for those things to happen and to gel between people, you need to spend time together physically. Once those things are actually, it goes faster in person, is the way I would describe it. It's not that it can't happen virtually, but I see the workplace as continuing to be the accelerator of a company's culture. And again, the culture, you can shape it according to each unique company's values, right? So whether one company values collaboration and in a certain way, that's up to each company to define what the essence of the culture is for them. But I that's why, if you ask me, the office workplace is here to stay. It will only get more intense. I think it will be a place where it will be required of us as designers that we make it worth people's time to spend days in the office, that it's a bit like going to Disneyland, right? If I think about my daughters and the impact it's had on them, those few days in their lives where we've gone to Disney, and it was such a strong experience, and that they could share with you what Disneyland means, and so if you think of the workplace that way, maybe we need to actually, out of this crisis, is design more intense, sort of an assault on the senses, and places that sort of double down on the very things that we were doing, but we need to turn up the volume a little bit more.
Yeah,
I think.
That's very much what I was thinking, that some of those themes and we try to identify several drivers every year, or workplace trends, and there's a few of those that are really proving valuable and very, very important right now. One is that human connection and supporting it, and I think another one is really how much we use the workplace as a destination, as a destination, somewhere great to go. Like we said, it might become your second safe place. But there's probably two big streams of thought here I'm seeing in the questions. And we can't deal with them all individually because there's a mass of really great questions, and thanks for those, everybody. But one is about densification, particularly of desking and workstations. And yes, there's the reference to the 6-foot office, which is an interesting one. I guess there's a lot of nuances or flavors of that around right now as a concept. The other is that workplace might become not really so much for desk work, but for those meetings, particularly for that human connection, the real life meeting, where you can, I don't just hear what you say, but I'm across the table from you. And as we know, communication is not all verbal, is it? It's body language, and it's much more than just the words, and much more.
What you're making, Nick, as to the 6-foot office. I was wondering whether Andy might have some views on that. I was looking at one of your articles recently, Andy, around trying things. You know, let's make a few mistakes, because no one's been in this situation before. Glad of your thoughts around some of the experiments we see happening and where they might lead us.
Absolutely, and to go back to my first comment, I think it's a real opportunity for experimentation right now. We've had to react to a circumstance. Nobody was ready for this. Nobody knew what to do. We were all kind of half ready for remote working or flexible working as far as we could be, and we've just kind of adapted as we go. So I think it's a great opportunity to have those experiments, whether it's a 6-foot workspace, whether it's that changed relationship between how work and life flex into each other, and those are themes that we've kind of started to look at. And I think it's a great opportunity. But then to go right back to my first point, it's as long as the organization, I think individually, we're all ready to do those experiments, to take the risks and work out how best to work and how best to get things done and the right environment for that. But is the organization ready to kind of pass over some of that freedom to go, okay, well, you as an individual or a team or a unit, you have license to work out the best way to do it for yourselves, and we'll support you in that. And then you can pilot things and we can filter them across the organization, as opposed to kind of going from the top down with that strategy, because I think that's the only way you're going to see some of these experiments or these more kind of progressive or controversial approaches really allowed to be tried, particularly in the most high pressure arenas, really. And just to quickly add to that and pick up on what Nick was saying just now, and actually what you were saying, Philippe, as well, that kind of that human connection, and that connection not only with each other around collaborating, but also with the brand. And it's kind of built around, I don't necessarily like the word culture, but that kind of shared identity and shared purpose. And kind of to jump on the analogy bandwagon, you can support a sports team without being in the stadium. You can be the other side of the world and you can watch the matches or look at the results, but really the biggest, most intense connected experience you'll have with that team is in that stadium on match day. And I kind of feel that's almost where we're going. Yes, you can work. Yes, you can get things done. You don't always need to be in the workplace, or I mean, in some cases you do, but where possible you don't. But actually, when you're in there, they need to be designed in a way that gives you the opportunity to do the right tasks in the right way. And whether that's kind of through an experimental design or however it might be set up, I think we kind of need to keep in mind that's really what we're trying to achieve.
And I'd like to address the 6-foot office for a moment, because that has been circulating quite a bit. And in general, I think it's important that we modulate our reaction and use common sense. To the points, all the points about interaction and people coming together, that's huge. And in terms of people coming back to the office now, we do need to take lots of cautious steps, ensure physical distancing, hygiene, et cetera. But the reality is that in the long term, people will come together in closer than 6-foot proximity. It does not make sense to have a rigid 6-foot office that you arrive to after spending 45 minutes on the T with 500 of your closest friends. you know what I mean? So I think we need to be sensible about those things and recognize that people will go to concerts, they will go to stadiums, you know, we're going to be in close proximity at some point in the future, and that the office doesn't bear the sole responsibility of keeping people 6 feet apart. And from a practical standpoint, you know, as we're thinking about where to invest our dollars in space, does it make sense to put a bunch of money into sneeze guards between desks if they're not legally required, which in some localities they are? But is that the best way to spend the resources? Or do we want to be thinking about how to configure the space differently so that people can get more out of their time together when they are in the office?
Yeah, and actually, I don't know if you've seen this really incredible diagram in the New York Times that was showing the radius of a sneeze and how far so essentially plexiglass will not keep you safe. It requires a lot more than that to contain the droplets of saliva when you sneeze. So I agree. I think we have to keep perspective. You know, we cannot fall victim to hysteria, and we have to be able to see beyond the short term. There's the reality of now, but 2 years from now, it'll be very different. One aspect also that's a bit counterintuitive, maybe just a bit of a detail, but when we say people go, let's say, using the office to socialize and come together, I think one lesson also from the work from home experience is that actually for a lot of people, it's not the most quiet, the most appropriate place for focus work. You know, granted, kids will go back to school, and that will change things, but I think it also further reinforces one of the consistent things we've been hearing these past few years about the intense need for focus and quiet, and to the extent that for some people that's just not possible working from home. That still very much is something that we need to come up with some creative, innovative solution to actually be able to provide in the workplace. And I think it goes again along with the lines of maybe what Andy was saying about the analogy of the sports stadium, but taking it in a bit of a different direction. You know, the stadium is a very intense experience, and I think the workplace needs to become that very intense place, whether it's intensely quiet or intensely loud or intensely social. You really want to make that a memorable, impactful place, knowing that people perhaps will spend fewer hours there.
Just to on the points I think you alluded to there, and a couple of questions we're seeing from the audience around the impact of face-to-face interaction, and particularly looking at the mental health and well-being side of things. I think as we were discussing earlier, this comes back to individuals, it comes back to people, and I think the concept that, you know, work from home works for everyone, I don't think anyone believes that, but the understanding that people need that face-to-face interaction. There's a lot of talking around a global loneliness epidemic, which I'm sure has only been accelerated with the current situation. And glad to your thoughts, Adrienne, around how we can combat that with the workplace, and maybe some practical tips that real estate leaders could be implementing within their future strategies.
Wow, it's a great question. And you know, we just had a call this morning, an employee business briefing. And I think that was the leading comments from our leadership were about, you know, the safety and well-being of the employees is the first priority. And it was, I think, and I hear that every time we get together. It's an extremely reassuring message, and it reinforces that we have to take care of ourselves and each other. So I think that's probably the very most important thing. And then there was an interesting part. One of our leaders, Julie Gerberding, actually used to lead the CDC. So she's been, you know, phenomenal to have at the helm, you know, as we're going through this. But went through a number of examples of how people are demonstrating resilience. And I thought that was fantastic for a few reasons. One, to hear what great things people are doing, but it's it also serves the purpose of, look at what you're doing. You're all, how do I say this? By articulating those examples, she's reinforcing that not only is this a priority, but it's a capability, and so you're already putting yourself in the mindset of, oh yeah, I am resilient. So I think that to bring this full circle, leadership is the very most important thing. And then back to the comments earlier about, this being sort of a democratization of distributed work. And, it's a conference call is so much better when everybody is on it together versus you're the one person on the phone when everyone else is in the room. We're experiencing some of that today, and that is engendering an empathy that I think will help for our sort of collective well-being and mental health. And the more we can think of each other as humans, and be, and really understand each other at that deeper level, the better off we'll all be.
Good. We're just coming into the last few minutes of our time together. Andy, glad your thoughts around the whole question of well-being, and, as Adrienne said, caring for other humans.
Absolutely, I think it's extraordinarily important, and we've seen it come through in workplace design, regardless of whether you're in an office or otherwise over the last few years anyway, because there's now data that backs up the fact that if you're going to be cynical about it and go from a profit point of view, people are more productive when they're happier, they're more content, they're well looked after, they don't have the pressures of distraction of home life, meaning they can't work, and they have that kind of flexibility to kind of blend that experience, and it's extraordinarily important. And I think it is possible we're replicating a lot of the connections at the moment digitally, but I think there is that, you hear stories every day of people who just want to hug outside of and I'm not saying we're all going to go to work and hug each other, although we've all seen tech startups where that does happen. But there is something to be said for that well-being of being in the same place as people, sometimes having that mutual support. And there are some great things coming up. You're seeing a lot of companies all of a sudden blending previous technology that was used exclusively for home. So like WhatsApp groups are coming up. So it's a way away from Microsoft Teams or Slack or whatever you use to kind of share a bit of fun and a bit of that kind of, going back to that kind of water cooler conversation, a bit of banter that isn't necessarily for the official channels, but maintains some of that culture and some of that connection. And seen some really cool things like company pub quizzes happen and end of week drinks. And it's something we did last week for the first time. Just everybody grabbed a beer and got on the phone both sides of the Atlantic, got on Zoom or somewhere, and just had a nice chat. And it wasn't about work, but there was a real glow from going, oh, you know what, we are all still on the same team, we're all still there. And it kind of, you carry that back into your work. And there's a lot to be said about loneliness and the pressures that everybody's experiencing at the moment. And I know we're going to run out of time, so but yeah, it's really important.
And maybe if I can add a little bit to round out the great comments of Adrienne and Andy, and sometimes it's the little things, right? And I hope some of these habits stick. But we've gotten, for example, in the habit of doing a quick huddle in the morning, just checking in, quick 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and really the purpose is not to have this very strict business driven agenda. Is to chit chat and make sure everybody's accounted for, and actually it's been great, and it's allowed us to get to know each other better, and probably is something that under normal circumstances in the office we wouldn't take the time to do unless there was a serious business agenda to drive through. And then the other one is, I think, to look at health and wellness a little bit more holistically. And I think this will be good for Spacestor in a way, but workplace does not extend solely to the office, but it's now part of our homes. And so how do we make our homes more comfortable, more ergonomic, better lighting? I think there will be a lot of innovation coming out of product or furniture manufacturers that start to bridge the gap between what is appropriate in a home and the performance we expect in the office of our furniture. to maybe creating these hybrid pieces where it's actually something that sits well at home, but offers you the performance from a health and well-being standpoint that you'd expect from a commercial grade piece of equipment.
Fantastic. Appreciate your thoughts, Philippe. Nick, you've got a second or two of comment on that before we wrap up? We're just coming to the last couple of minutes now.
No, nothing specific on that one. I did want to acknowledge the questions which we haven't really answered yet because we can't fit them all in. We do appreciate them. And there's a question, will there be another one of these webinars? Yes, the next one's slated for Thursday, the 14th of May. Be a similar time, maybe half an hour earlier. And we're building the panel for that. Again, it's going to be a multinational, global panel. We have got questions. I think we've touched on most of the core topic of the questions, but we haven't been able to address everything individually. We will try and follow up with everybody post this webinar. I'll flip it back to you, Alex.
Good, thanks, Nick. There was one quick question which I was wondering whether we could get maybe 20 or 30 seconds from each of the panelists. Valentina's saying, I'm wondering if companies are going to be hiring. I'm graduating in May and I'm curious and nervous about finding jobs. I think we could all definitely empathise with Valentina's situation. Any comments, Adrienne, from a East Coast perspective?
I think there will always be opportunities. I won't lie, I think it's going to be a tough time to be a graduate, and I graduated in the recession of the early 90s and feel your pain. I think pay attention to what's happening out there and who's hiring. You know, we're in a period right now where there's some unemployed and then there's some overemployed. So there's opportunity. It may not be your first choice, but you know, jump in there and contribute where you can.
Good, helpful advice. Philippe, you got any comments for Valentina?
Well, I would say yes. There's, you know, it's difficult for a lot of companies right now, but be patient, be willing to be flexible, and things will get better. It'll be tricky the next few months, but we will come out of this. I would say, you know, reach out to us and let's see. It's not, in other words, it's never too early to plant a seed. So you know, send your resume, send your portfolio, have a conversation, and when things do get better, then there'll already have been a first conversation, and from there, you never know.
Anything you could share, Andy, from the clients that you work with, both US and UK?
I mean, absolutely. To go, you know, in addition to those points, I think do just start conversations, but be very kind of mindful. A lot of people now who are clinging onto their jobs with the increased uncertainty are now starting to think of, well, how do I actually want to work? Where do I want to work? What brands do I connect with? What organizations do I connect with? So I think the earlier you can start that connection, when the time comes and an opportunity arises, then you will be well placed to take that opportunity, but also you'll be able to explore where you want to go. I'm a huge advocate of staying useful, for want of a better phrase. So I wouldn't always say hold out for that perfect opportunity, but do go and gather experiences that help you in the right direction, but always keep your eye on where you want to be, and make sure you're having those conversations so that when the opportunity does come, whether it's in May, whether it's 6 months, a year down the line, you're ready and you're in pole position for it.
And I, maybe in closing, I would just say, you know, some very valuable piece of advice that was given to me really early in my career is use that time to get to know yourself. And I know it sounds simple and easy, but it's actually the hardest thing to do. And know yourself and be honest with yourself. And I think what you'll glean from that will make everything easier. And now is a good time for introspection, for stepping back from looking at things with a different perspective, and so yeah, that would be my final words, I guess. Alex, you're
I
on
think
mute.
you're on mute.
So, sorry, thank you, Philippe. Very helpful comments, and I hope it's been helpful to Valentina as well. I hope the search for a permanent role is successful. So thank you again to the panelists. Really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today to share your insights and perspective. I think it's been very valuable, very insightful conversation. I've certainly scribbled down some very interesting points to go and look into in the future. So we're going to launch a quick poll now so the audience and attendees can just share a few more of your views on the impact of COVID-19 on the future. So I'd be glad of your participation in that. Aside of that, we'd like to wish you a fantastic rest of your day, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining Spacestor. We really appreciate your time. And thank you again to our panelists. Nick, have you got anything to say to wrap us up?
Yeah, thanks to all attendees. There will be more of these sessions. Please join them. We're also going to create an ongoing, shall I say, community group for the emerging wisdom and thoughts around how to cope with the post-COVID workplace. Don't know what platform that will be on, but please just use the Q&A box if you'd like to be connected with that. Stay connected. And thank you again, Adrienne and Philippe and Andy, very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Stay safe and sane, everybody.
Yes, stay safe.